And this is why I'm so excited to talk to you
Wow.
about this topic. We were saying just a few minutes earlier that I have for a long time in my profession felt that I'm a little bit of a square peg in a round hole and that it is my nature to question things. And I don't always feel like that's welcome. And you definitely get the sense often in dietetics to never be wrong, right? Like don't be risky because then you could be wrong. And to be wrong is like the absolute worst thing that you can do.
Correct. Yeah.
So I'm very excited now about what I see as more critical conversations that are taking place around like how we actually practice nutrition. Like, for example, the use of BMI as a tool in personal nutrition care, or like how deeply Eurocentric nutrition research as a field is,
Mm.
like the fixation on like the Mediterranean diet, for example, when there's like a whole there's a whole literally a whole other world of dietary patterns and ways of eating. And so like this makes me really happy, but one of the reasons why I'm so excited to talk to you is that what I'm not seeing a lot of is consideration of gender in nutrition. And,
Yeah.
why do
That's
you feel that we are so slow to address this?
well, Desiree, how much time do you have?
All of the time in the
You
world for
told me
you.
45 minutes. Well, why are we so slow to what was the word did you use? A verb?
Address.
Address. Yeah, well, golly, it all goes back to what you said at the beginning of don't question things. And so it's a very comfortable world for heterosexual cisgender people to make sure that everything that they see and hear fits within their frame of reference and their way of being in the world. It's comfortable, you know? And so and I want to build on what you just said. Like an awful lot of people have done an awful lot of work to get to the position where you and I could sit here today and even have this conversation. So
Yeah.
my heart is full in thanks for those people. Um, and why haven't we addressed gender? Well, because we live in a male-dominated society. I'll just speak about Canada because I don't know about the rest of the world. But we live in well, I don't know about the rest of the world. That's pretty darn true. But I do know there are other ways of getting your nourishment than through dumping some olive oil onto things. Um, okay. Well, our world is male centric. Our thinking in dietetics has been male centric. So even though I don't know about you, but I was taught by almost exclusively women when I was a student. I
Me
mean, an
too.
undergrad student. You too. And when those people, when I think about those women who taught me, so I was in university in the 70s, they had all been alive and serving during World War II and the Korean War. And I've said to myself, they literally fought the war. And as my father and my grandfather used to say to me, who were in Europe during World War II, when you question authority, that's not how you win a war. You just do what you're told. So that's the mindset I think that's come along in our profession and probably all
Yeah.
professions, health professions. I'm going to talk about health and human service. I can't talk about everything else, but in the world where we are in the we are we are in the sorry, my sister-in-law just got out of the hospital and it buzzed, so you
Yeah.
can
Go ahead.
hack out that bit, please.
We will
Um,
take this out.
she's giving me like 15-minute posts about how she's doing. Um, so don't question. So we're socialized to not question. And then I remember, and I've been really kind of embarrassed and so sad by like I've really taken to really feeling my feels, like if I'm sad, I'm sad. And one of the things I'm really sad about, I remember being taught as a dietetic intern that we were not supposed to talk to the physicians
Mm.
and especially the specialists because they were far too busy. And we were to write a note and stick it on the front of the chart so that they could read our note. And I'm thinking about how incredibly passive that is. how that sets you up to believe me, a young early 20s something, oh my gosh, they're way more important than I am. So why is that? Okay, they're physicians. Okay, so they have so much privilege in our society. Most of them were men, and they're too busy for us. We're in our small little affairs, you know? And that was how I was socialized. And of course, darn it all, didn't I do the same thing when I had interns and
Mm.
I was a preceptor. So I'm really embarrassed about that. I wish there had been some really strong feminists around who said, no, like that's nonsense. We need to talk to these people. If we're all part of a team, as we're being told we are, and I'm talking about in the 80s, I'm not talking about today, but personally, not, I mean, not personally, a person might think, I just was trained in the 20s and I wonder about that. Anyway, I wish there had been a big influx. It was the 70s, it was after women's lib in the 60s, supposedly, right? No, it was the 80s. Um, all of that stuff about women's rights and voices of women being heard wasn't heard where I worked. That's for sure. And I think it's only happened like little tiny bits over 40 years where people, so we've just ascertained before she hit record, there's a 20-year plus age difference between us. So it's really interesting because it's really a generational perspective, which is, and then for you now, Desiree, there's people a whole generation younger than you who are dietitians, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's so interesting to think about what happened from the 40 years I've been practicing in terms of dietitians' voices being heard and now, like what's happened and are they being heard? And if they're not, golly darn it, we got to do something about that because yeah, I'd usually say stronger language, but
Yeah.
golly darn, it works for me today. Okay, so back to gender. So it's a
Yeah.
masculist world. Everything that we read comes from a masculist lens. Masculism being, think of feminism, masculism. I used the word masculist the other day, and my friend said, I've never heard that word before. And I went, oh, come on, you people, where have you been? But anyway, it's a male perspective view of the world. I keep hitting my microphone. What counts as knowledge? What counts as important? And we haven't, as women, we've had some incredible women in Canadian history who've questioned all of that. I don't think it's found its way through in dietetics yet. And
Yeah.
I think so. We're just starting to talk about it. So that's about gender writ large. And then, if I may, Desiree, if that's okay to get to, so when we think about what is gender and how is it expressed and what do people need from us who have moved beyond the binary of male and female in their lives. Is that okay if we go there,
Please
Desiree?
do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So we think about people who identify as gender diverse, trans. Some folks identify as trans, and what's happening and I'm like I am not part of that world, so I live vicariously through one of my kids and one of my children who does identify as gender diverse, and so I pick up a lot just by listening to the things that they're talking to me about. Trans can be oversimplified. Reductionism, that's another part of it, Desiree. Let's come back to that. I'm going to
Yeah.
write that down because that's all part of this gender question you ask about here, right? We could just go on about that one question for the rest of the time together. Okay, so let's reduce it down to its simplest thing. Well, if a person's not accepting the binary of male and female, then they must be accepting the binary. They're the male transition to female and female transition to male. There you go. Nice and tidy, all tidied up. Let's go home. That's
Yeah.
not true. That's just so blatantly not true. It's all over the place. There's fluidity. And even if a person identifies by a certain like where are they in the world of gender, because it's not linear, it's hugely diverse, right? Where
Mhm.
do they may not identify that way later on today. Maybe it's different from how they felt this morning, and that's okay. And so back to having the I don't want to call it the scientific view, because boy, science is, see what I just did, I infused boy into that. That's masculine thinking. See,
Yeah.
it's evaded my speech. Anyway, if we go and think about, I've lost my train of thought.
like popping people into their boxes, right? So like it has to be
Yes,
this
yes,
or that.
yes. So then we get to what you said earlier about BEE and BMI. You didn't mention BEE, basal
Mhm.
energy expenditure, but let's do that now, shall we? Yes, and
Yeah, let's
BMI.
do it.
So like
And let's and
let's
let's define so let's define these two terms for folks who may
yeah,
not be like super into nutrition. So what is BEE?
basal energy expenditure, which was created during the Industrial Revolution to ascertain how little did mill owners have to feed their mill workers in order for them to still work. That was its origin.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
this I showed you this earlier, but I'm going to show it to you again. T-shirt that my friend Lucy Afframore, Dr. Lucy Afframore, gave me,
mhm.
and it says, "I am not a bomb calorimeter." And so that was used in the early days of nutritional science to ascertain how much energy did a sample of food have, so that they could calculate. That's where those, how many calories in a donut, how many calories in a carrot. That's where all that stuff came from,
Yeah,
right?
the origin of the lunacy that is the 100-calorie snack pack became, like that bomb calorimeter, the
The
idea
heck
of
is 100-calorie snack
I
pack?
know, right? Like
What is
all of
it?
these just well, it was like one of these things that particularly when I was still in private practice, people are like, "Oh, well, I snack on these 100-calorie snack packs of cookies and things because they're only 100 calories." I'm like, "What does calories tell you
Doesn't
anything about the
mean anything.
food? It doesn't
Oh
tell
my
you the
goodness.
protein for your muscles.
Good
It doesn't
Lord.
tell you the vitamin C for your meat. Like we just calorie became the end all be all of nutrition. And that was the origin of like figuring out, well, what is the potential energy of a food? But our bodies don't work like that. So when we say we are not a bomb calorimeter, it means we are not the same as that machine that determined this calorie count for a food,
I gotta turn it
which
there.
has no meaning and like importance in how we choose our foods on a day-to-day basis. Just
No.
garbage.
So, listeners, I hope that you got that message from Desiree. It has no effect whatsoever on on what we eat and why and how it makes us feel and all of and I mean feel in the biggest sense of the word. Um, I-
Yeah.
wow, it's so huge. Like it's so exciting for me to think about. Like I think probably this is a conversation I've wanted to have for a long time, Desiree. So I thank you very much. And maybe we could do this without being recorded. I don't know.
Yeah.
But to think about what if we took everything we thought we knew and just said, okay, that's not it. So now where are we at? Because I've heard this expressed. We're going to come back to what's
Yeah.
BMI, but just a minute. I've heard this expressed as, well, then I guess the world doesn't need dietitians. That's reductionist thinking too. That's a one or the other, right? Well, if you don't like my calculations and the not mine, if you don't like the calculations that form how we've made decisions about other human beings in the past, then I guess you don't need me. It's this
Mhm.
very like hands up, I guess you don't need me. Oh, I could not disagree more. I
Yeah.
think that for those people who come at dietetics as a, I know some stuff about the body and how it uses food, I know some stuff.
Yeah.
I know some stuff about where food comes from. I know some stuff about people and their relationships with food. Oh, that sounds so unprofessional. Oh dear. I know some stuff. I know some things.
But
And
that
you live a very complex life that I don't understand. I don't know anything about. So please share that with me. And maybe some of the stuff in my big storehouse of knowledge that's right behind me might be useful. But the most important and wonderful thing that we could offer people is to be there for them and witness their narrative and share they've got a place to share their story. And I know from my work of years as a dietitian doing nutrition counseling, which I did long before I was a dietitian, working in as a professor, was me thinking, oh, I have nothing nutrition to offer these folks from just based on their narrative. But they were so relieved of like, whew, get all that, like all that stuff. So if there's a word for it, which I love, the stuff in their head
Yeah.
about food and eating and what I'm supposed to do, called dietary cacophony. It's the
Ooh.
noise we hear about what we should be doing. And so much of that noise for us comes from inside our own heads, right?
I,
It's like, especially for women, I should do this, I should do that, I should,
yeah.
you know what I mean?
And we will come back. I mean,
Yeah,
that BEE, the origin of the BEE, because I'm more familiar with BMI, which we'll come back to in a
yeah,
second.
yeah.
But just, I mean, everything that you have said right there, there are so many things that come to my mind. One, that, like our profession is overwhelmingly, like white and female in Canada and
Cis
often
female.
cisgendered
Hmm.
female. And we have been so good. And one of the arguments sort of like raising awareness about like what many people think of as feminism, but is really white feminism, is this idea that, as like the white cis woman, our goal is simply to gain equality with white cis men, which completely leaves out how damaging this entire system actually is. And I feel that sometimes in the field of dietetics, we've been really great at like creating that cage
Yeah,
for ourselves.
we've been very
And
good. Yeah.
we've been very good at very reductionist, binary, hierarchical thinking in our profession. And I agree with you that one of the, you know, biggest privileges of our profession and one of potentially the gifts that we have to give is that in a healthcare system that is sort of characterized by these very transactional, very brief, very rushed interactions, oftentimes dietitians have the most time to spend, the most time to be there to witness, to help. I don't know, when you were talking about that like nutritional cacophony, I almost think of like, so we're the defragmenters, right? Like you have to defragment your hard
That's
drive, gets
brilliant.
so much garbage
We are
in
the
it,
defragmenters.
and the computer doesn't work so well. And then you have to like defrag your hard drive, and like sitting down with a compassionate, open, humble dietitian allows you to sort of defrag in like the best possible way.
Oh, I love that.
And that has nothing to do with giving you a 1,200 calorie meal plan, like, which
No,
should never happen. Like
no.
any dietitian, like someone just recently asked me, I was like, oh, I want like a 1,200 calorie meal plan. And I was like, no dietitian ever again, unless you are a child on like nutritional support. Like no dietitian should ever give anyone a 1,200 calorie meal plan ever again.
Mm-mm. So much damage has been done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I'm not making excuses for anybody, but with the best of intentions, we were taught to be good dietitians. And that word good is so loaded, right? But good dietitians, competent dietitians, that's the
Yeah,
key word there,
it is.
competent. And that meant you knew your number stuff. And if you didn't do the number stuff, then I've been certainly questioned about maybe you're not quite, wasn't competent, but it was some very, um, not very nice term about, maybe you're a bit over it, you're a bit past it, you should like
Mm-hmm.
go. And that was because I refused to believe that this person who was extremely malnourished and needed, and would benefit for sure. I hate to say anybody needs anything, because who am I to say? But in my recommendation, they needed a delivery of nutrients quickly, and
Yeah.
and people with head and neck cancer usually have fantastic guts. Their guts are great. That's who I worked with, people with head and neck cancer. So it's a matter of delivering the nutrients into the digestive tract, and then, the magic of digestion takes place, and they carry on. Anyway, this was in the era, you'll remember it well, Desiree, with the refeeding syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
about, you couldn't possibly give people, and for good reason. Like, I mean, people who have absolutely been starving in concentration camps, or, you know, horrendous social situations that people have been systematically starved. When you feed them a regular meal, often those people died
Yeah.
because it was so overwhelming. It's like you kind of have to wake up your metabolism, right? So I understand that completely, but in this case, this person's gut was fine, and they were going to be fine with starting, not as low as, what is it, 10 mils an hour or something
Yeah.
like that. Anyway, this other dietitian thought that I was incompetent, that I should didn't wasn't I aware of a thing called refeeding syndrome? And I said, yes, but it doesn't apply in this situation. And it's kind of like that. We get these waves of fads, right? And in that particular area, it was the fad of the refeeding syndrome. Oh my golly. And I think, and I'm
Yeah.
worried a little bit. I'm going to circle back now to gender. Why is it the way? Why haven't we
Yeah.
addressed this before?
Yeah.
Um, uh, because it hasn't been the dominant point of view.
Hmm.
It's it takes a lot of whatever that is, oomph. It takes a lot of fortitude for any group of people or individuals to say, like as you have, hey, wait a minute, that's not fitting right with me. And unlike many people, Desiree, you and I haven't left dietetics. We're still here because
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I believe I have lots to offer people through the profession that I am privileged to practice. I just don't have to do it the way I was taught. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? So we're like
Yeah.
out here going through, like, I'm thinking about Princess Bride, where there's like that swamp they go through, and you
Yeah.
have to be careful where you step. You know, and we have to. We're trying to find our way forward, but at the bottom of it all, for me, is I'm a care. I try very hard to be a caring, compassionate human. Where some stranger has has viewed me as someone they could trust to share their narrative. And I am so privileged, like I'm so honored that they want to do that. So we get
Hmm.
back to gender. Okay, I'm going to get there. So so it hasn't been convenient to uh convenient, and it's very difficult to start to change the way things are.
Hmm.
And and also, another huge thing why I said we could be here all day has to do with what gets funded for research
Yeah.
and who holds the purse strings, like who holds the decision making. So I'm one of many people who've written lots of grants, have been rejected because, like, I wrote a grant proposal several years ago. I should dust it off now, and maybe times have changed enough that it might be accepted, but it was on trying to understand what the food, nutrition, and eating issues of trans and gender diverse people are. And the response from the reviewers was, well, how many trans people are there in Canada
Oh,
anyway? Well, honest to goodness, how many heart transplant people are there in Canada anyway? But they still get funded, right, to find out about that life. There's a lot fewer heart transplant people than there are trans and gender diverse people, they say, as they get all irate. Do you know what I mean? So it's what
yeah.
counts as worthwhile research. So
Mhm.
that is highly controlled. And like I said, it's not that people don't present proposals, don't submit proposals. Is that they don't get funded. And if you don't get funded, then what do you do?
Yeah.
So a lot of researchers get tired of playing that game, and they say, okay, what's getting funded this year? That's what I'm going to do. Right. So
Exactly.
then we look about us, as we do as dietitians and other health and human service professionals, and say, okay, where's the evidence that supports what I'm supposed to do when I'm working with these people? And it's not there. So that's not the fault of the researchers. It's not it's because
Yeah.
we live in this structure, all of us together, that's male dominated, white Eurocentric thinking, as you said. We're working really hard at that. And thank goodness it's about darn time that we did do that, right?
Yeah.
So our literature so I think a really big like let me just go back to that comment because it's loaded, right? How many trans and gender diverse people are there in Canada anyway? Meaning you couldn't possibly find any in to do your research, so we're not going to give you any money. Oh my goodness, like literally I have one living in the house,
Yeah.
one. I have several, actually. I have a person for whom this is relevant to their life with me
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
this house, right? So and then that sounds so stupid. Like, Catherine, you couldn't possibly do research with one person. That's not what I mean. I mean, look about you. Look about you, because we are so used to looking for people who dress right, people have the right haircut, the right color, the right whatever. And excuse me, I have a runny nose. Excuse me. And if you step out of that, what's that expression? Woe betide you. I think that's what it is from Shakespeare. Because the pressures to look and act a certain way are
Mhm.
so strongly embedded in, like, we're all socialized for that. So, like, hats off to people who have done the really hard work of what who do I feel I am? Who do I feel I am anyway? And how can I best convey my true self, or live my true life? Right? How
Yeah.
can I do that? Like hallelujah! Like, I don't want to say hallelujah because that's Christian, but like like wow,
Yeah.
they've done a whole lot of work, those folks, and it is our responsibility. Our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms says we must. This is the way for us that no one can be discriminated against based on their gender identity.
Yeah.
So it is up to us as dietitians to be ready for who comes. And so now we get back to your points about BEE and BMI, right? Well, those were designed for A, machines, and B, the BMI, no, it's not basal metabolic, it's body mass
Body mass.
index,
Yeah.
which I know, so you probably know more about that than I do, but Northern Europeans, men,
Yeah.
that's,
And with an insurance, the idea of
yeah,
creating
yeah,
the quote unquote average human, which was a European white male. So, and then basing
Northern
everything,
European, right? So
yeah,
no short
Northern
people
European,
allowed.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, my Portuguese folks need not apply. So, like, but
I'm sorry, Portugal, you're far too short for this
yeah,
experiment.
we're
Like,
we're we're small.
it was a convenience sampling, right? So we
Yeah.
happen to be here where there are taller European men, and we're going to create this thing called BMI to look at basically who dies earlier. Um, and who do we have to pay out insurance to?
Yeah. And then we now
Can you see
almost
my face? Ugh, like, that's so ick.
universally, and
Yeah,
we universally apply this tool in
and it's wrong.
one-on-one nutrition counseling, where if
No,
it has any utility, and some health professionals still argue that it does, I'm more on the no side.
I'm absolutely
If
on the
it
no side.
has any utility, it is as a population
Yeah,
and statistics only.
yeah.
Never sitting one on one with someone and is like, this is your BMI. And based
No,
on this is what you
yeah,
need to do.
yeah.
Because, like you said, this idea of competency in dietetics practice was so built on numbers
Mm-hmm.
and a legal obligation to what we call evidence-based practice. And, it creates a huge challenge for us when so much of the research that influences our recommendations is based on a certain, tiny subset of humanity, and particularly when it's strongly gendered. Like, within my own family, I have started to really, you know, be critical about how I think about how I practice nutrition and how I communicate those recommendations. And, I've been trying to degender my nutrition recommendations, like where I feel confident to do so. Like a good example is I revisited, I mean, I'm a gut health gal, so like fiber is my jam. And so when I like looked at like fiber, I was like, okay, the recommendations for fiber are really based on energy intake. So it seems 100% unnecessary that it's gendered. And yet, for some reason, we still say women need 25 grams and men need 38 grams. Well, like, what if a man is 5'2" and a couch potato versus what if a woman is 6'1" and a marathoner? And so now I've shifted my recommendations to smaller, less active bodies, 25 grams a day, larger, more active bodies, 38 grams a day. The other one that I feel really comfortable in is iron, because it's very clear when you look at the recommendations, that the variable is menstruation.
Mm-hmm.
When a person stops menstruating, the recommendations align again,
Mm-hmm.
between genders, between men and women. So why can't we just say menstruating adults versus non-menstruating
Sure.
adults? Like,
That makes sense to me, right? Because it
like,
doesn't matter. Like, for instance, I've talked to a goodly number of people who identify as trans men who still menstruate, right? They
yeah,
don't want to.
I would prefer not to. I mean,
I
as
prefer
most of us
not
would.
to, but so that's so their gender marker on a chart might be F, might be M, but
Hmm.
they're still menstruating. So that gets us to the question of, okay, so when is it okay, or how do we politely, um, well, politely isn't, aren't we all polite? How do you raise that in a way that's safe for people, or safer for
Hmm.
people to divulge that information, right? So I think, I really liked what you said. There are people who menstruate, people who don't. I mean, if there's a person who's gender diverse, I don't think it's a difficult question to say, do you menstruate?
Yeah.
Because they know whether they do or not. And if they go, okay, they don't. And they never have, and they never will. Right? And if they ever did, or they do still, they'll go, yep, uh-huh. It's a funny thing. Cis males and menstruation. That's a
Yeah.
funny thing. Anyway, we could have a comedy whole routine about this.
Yeah.
Okay, so I like that a lot, what you just said. And I've even gotten to, away from the number of grams, Desiree, to think about, okay, so because I have a colleague who anyway, it doesn't matter how I know this person, but they live with an ileostomy, and they have learned an ileostomy, meaning their whole colon is gone, and they collect waste in a bag through their ileum, right? It
Hmm.
comes out through their abdomen. And they have learned that at least 60 grams of fiber a day is what keeps that ostomy functioning perfect, right? And all the messages they ever got, they're okay. All the messages they ever got were low fiber, low fiber, low fiber.
Yeah.
And then it was a horrible, day of trying to literally contain waste and drink enough liquid to replace losses and so on. And so they did some experimenting, and lo and behold, she says, again, they say from a Christian
Yeah.
text, lo and behold, that's what made that ostomy work perfect. So I'm not sure about
Yeah.
numbers. So what I've gotten to thinking about is, what is it that your gut feels it's best? And then that would be a good amount of fiber for you. And so I'm a big fan of, like, I don't know, you probably heard me say this before, eat things that as much more foods that were once a plant,
Hmm.
and as close to the way it came out of the ground. Right?
Yeah.
So like, I don't eat a raw potato. Don't do that. But there's a difference between a baked potato and French fries, or potato chips, especially dusted with chemical flavoring. I'm making a face, and that's being very judgmental about people who love food like that. I just don't like them. I never have. Even back in the olden days, you won't know this, Desiree, so I'll tell you.
Oh,
Back in the olden
okay.
days, all chips were plain. Like when I was a kid, all chips were plain. And my dad used to slice the bag on the side to make a bigger opening, and put salt and vinegar on them.
No.
Yes, and
Oh, I
so
love
and
this.
and then my friend who I've known since we were 4. We lived across the road from me. She goes, "Remember your dad used to do that?" And then there was like the big renovation, big evolution to, what if you put ketchup in a little dish and you dunk them, right? And now we have ketchup flavored fries, or
Yeah.
not fries, potato chips, right?
Yeah.
But back, and what if we put the little pickle, and like, and so and now it's not a little pickle, it's some dust. There was
Yeah.
no pickle ever, Desiree.
Well, exactly. Like,
There was no pickle ever to make the pickle dust.
yeah.
Um,
And it's so interesting what you said about your friend with the ileostomy,
uh-huh.
because and where I find, and this is a whole other thing, it's so different when you're sitting down one on one with someone than when you are providing public health, and I always hesitate saying what I do on the internet is public health, but technically it's public health because I am one person talking to many people. And
Yep.
you do get into this, what sells online, what hooks people in, what really sort of like attaches them to your message are these like very grandiose, very binary, very definitive
Very
statements.
reductionist, very simple.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
lectins are evil, never eat them again, versus like, well, just like eat enough plant foods and like fiber to like make yourself feel better, people would be like, so I do
Like, what
find it
is
really,
that?
yeah,
Okay, and
they're like, it's
that
too
gets us
wishy-washy,
to,
right?
what do you mean there's a link between what I eat and how I feel? What do you mean? Because I think as humans, we've been deconditioned to even do that, right? To
Yeah.
to really feel like I said earlier, feel our feels, but I mean that all the way, like and the whole what is that? What's that expression? Like a gut feel.
Yeah.
Like literally, that's what I'm talking about. Like, oh, we could have the gut feel diet,
Yeah.
Desiree's gut feel diet.
Desiree's
You know,
gut feels, feel your feels.
like yeah, if it isn't some kind, so and then you think, and then I think, okay, so why is that's what catches on? That's about book sales. It's about the capitalist nature of transmission of knowledge, and is it about what you're calling public health, like really
Yeah.
ensuring, trying to do what we can to ensure that the public is as well as they can be.
Yeah. And
It's
for the
not.
end user too, because like we have plenty of dietitians who listen, but like a lot of just like everyday folks who are listening and recognizing the psychology that happens when you are interacting with this type of information, and it's how much it
Mm,
is about the conditioning of our minds for very reductionist, very black or white, very absolutist thinking. And like we have to continually like check ourselves. We're like, ooh, that seems like very new and very scary. I'm now scared of lectins. And you have to go, oh, wait a second. Like, let me backpedal, because
yeah,
why am I having this reaction? Is this a good reaction to have? And therefore, like, what is this person actually doing to me right now, as opposed to actually acting out of my best
yeah,
interest?
yeah.
Yeah,
That's
hard.
yeah, and I agree with you when you say, well, isn't it more appealing to people to think, oh my gosh, I've got numbers, I've got a prescription from a dietitian, so I feel safer.
Yeah,
And I don't know about you, but many times I always keep bits of paper, like a little pad of paper beside where and writing utensils and tissues. Now I would
yeah,
have cloth napkins that I'd bring home and wash, but anyway, in the day I had tissues, and because you're going to need them, right? And sometimes it was, the nutrition advice. So then we get into diet sheets, which wasn't what we were going to talk about, so we could just
hmm,
leave that for another day. But those are written down reductionist views of this is what this diet is, right? If we get away from that and say, I'm here to witness your narrative and give you my very best recommendations, that doesn't rely on numbers, that probably doesn't feel as safe for some people, right? Whereas,
yeah,
but then how many times have I heard people say, oh yeah, I got a brochure or a pamphlet from a dietitian or a physio and I came home and threw it in the paper recycling. So so literally, they're not useful. We know
yeah,
that. And I think a little bit of paper that says try to eat more foods that were once a plant. People can do that. They can go, oh, and then Desiree, you get people who are going, see, and I would say, this is me, plants. There's some foods that are roots, some foods that are stalks, some foods that are leaves, and some fruits that are the seeds, and some foods that are the veg, like the fruit,
yeah,
right? The thing that's got the seed. It's
yeah.
protecting the seed. That's a fruit. And they go, "Oh my God, really? That's what plants? That's what food is?" Like there's such a disconnect,
You
right?
know, and
Between
and I've had this so often in our, I mean, my major tagline is literally eat more plants. And like, and you'd be like, it is that simple, it is that profound.
Yeah,
And you often have, okay, so like these are the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts, the seeds, the legumes, the whole grains. And people be like, okay, so like I'm at Costco and tell me like which of these crackers is the best. And it's this idea that we are very conditioned to like, and you know what? I love things. I mean, I'll love a spicy dill chip. Like I love my things, my processed foods as much as I do my whole foods. Both can exist in our lives in a
yes, of
healthful life.
course. Yes.
But we are so conditioned that like food comes out of boxes and bags that like to wrap our head around, yeah, but what do I have for a snack? I was like, oh, there's some almonds in that bag. There's a really beautiful peach right there. Like our mind is blown. We're like, a peach for a
A peach?
snack?
That could be a snack.
But
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what about a venti double caramel crunch frappuccino? That's a snack. I was like, no, the peach is a snack. That is a very elaborate dessert.
A very elaborate dessert
Yeah.
that, yes, that's really a milkshake in
Mhm.
hot coffee form, you know. Anyway, but
Totally.
that's okay. Like if you like that, go ahead, have it,
Yeah.
right? It's
But
not my thing, but go ahead.
But I think it speaks to how like our brains just go into these very complex places when the like transformation is in the very simple things. It's like, do you sleep? Are you highly anxious and stressed out on a daily basis? Do you eat plant foods? Like we're constantly
Do you
looking,
eat?
do you eat?
Do
Do
you
you have
eat?
clean water?
Yeah.
Are you safe? I mean, and this is a question we might as well jump into it right now. This is a question I wanted to ask you later because one of the things that dietitians are taught, most of us think of us as like number crunchers or like weight loss diet or people, which couldn't be farther from the truth. But
No.
one of the core pieces of our education is food security, are the
Hmm.
determinants of health, like, and I was lucky enough at UBC that I felt that my education was actually, pretty balanced in talking about like, well, if someone doesn't have safety, if someone doesn't have a place to cook food, like how are they going to carry out your quote unquote nutrition recommendations, lady, when like
Yeah,
they
yeah.
can't cook food?
Right.
And so I think that's something that we don't talk about enough. But then
Hmm.
also dietitians, even in learning that and saying that I felt like it was balanced, gender didn't really come into that a lot.
Mm.
And also
Yike.
how
Yep.
gender identity impacts the
Yep.
determinants of health and
Yep.
nutrition care, like particularly the safety of trans people in our
Yep.
country. Like, can we talk about that a little bit?
Well, there isn't safety. I say
Yeah.
that as a het cis person myself. I just want to back up something you
Yeah.
said and put a little spin on that. You
Yeah.
said, we all learn about food security in our training. That isn't true,
Mm.
sadly. I've been a what do you call it, accreditation surveyor for university programs in Canada, and that's not true. Some of the
Wow.
programs I've been through it too, it's mentioned ever so briefly, but it's not. I would say you've had a solid grounding in that as the students who come through the university that I work at, but that's not. We cannot say that that's universal in Canada or
That is
national, right? Yeah.
such a
So that
shame.
in itself is a problem. And it's not so many years ago. I love to tell students this. So I'm trying to think. I've been here now for 11 years. So I'm going to say it was about 20-ish years ago or so. So you would have been in school then, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was a study that was done of clinical dietitians. So that's dietitians who work in hospital. And I don't even remember who did this study, but it was like, what is your, uh, what is your connection to food security as a clinical dietitian working with people in hospital who are going to go home? And it was overwhelmingly like more than 80% said food security has nothing to do with my job.
Oh,
Ugh, right? And so I don't know if I coined this phrase, but I certainly think about it all the time, which is the big pit of malnutrition just waiting outside the hospital doors that people fall into just because no one is thinking about this very basic thing that you just said, which
mhm.
is, do you have access to food? And some of the conversation at the time, kind of cast my mind back there because it's hard for you to remember, like we have there in history, there's like you impose today's values on what was, right? And
Yeah.
it's really hard not to do that. But I'm trying to think about, some of the conversation was, well, my job, back to what you're saying about reductionism and oversimplifying. So some of the respondents to that study say, well, my job is within the walls of this hospital. I can't think, and that's a big job already.
Mhm.
I can't think about what's going on outside. And also, so that would be like one thing, like, capacity for one human to, you know, It's a lot. I've worked as a clinical dietitian. There's a lot going on in clinics and hospitals to try to keep track of and do your very best job when there's lots of forces working against you to
Mm.
stop you from doing that. Uh,
Yeah.
and so, I must be nervous. um, and so food security, well, we were socialized that then you don't ever ask people about things like money, like income, like safety. You don't ask them that. That's a social worker's job. You don't do that. Right. And then I think things have changed now where dietitians, I think they are more comfortable with those kind of questions. Like, like, do you have food at home? That's pretty, I think that's an okay question. Do you
Yeah.
have food at home? You're not imposing anything about are you rich, are you poor? Like, do you have food at home? Because you could be very wealthy and have no food at home.
Yeah.
Right? And you could be living in poverty and have abundance food because you got some pretty swish cooking skills there, and
Yeah.
you know how to turn nothing into something, right? Um, well, almost all of our grandmothers knew how to do that, or your great grandmother knew how to do
Yeah.
that because they lived in poverty. Like my mom was poor and they had nothing, like literally nothing during the Great Depression in the 30s. My mom's almost 100. Um, and making something out of nothing, like, boy, what can you do with potatoes? Look at our Irish friends, right? What did they do with potatoes to stay alive? All kinds of people living in tight economic circumstances all around the world have done a pretty good job of learning how to use what's available to them to stay alive, right? So then we get into Desiree. I roll my eyes. Did you see me blink really slow? Because I just get pretty exhausted thinking about that. The marketing of what passes as normal, or like what's considered good
Hmm.
nutrition. There's so much marketing and capitalism and feeding the whole food machine that comes with a lot of nutrition recommendations, a lot of nutrition messaging, which concerns me a lot. When in fact, I think people, if back to what you said, feel your body, like feel what digestion feels like. Yes, you know what? After you eat something, your gut does expand a little bit. It does make noise because that's normal
Normal.
digestion. You're going to feel tired because all that blood is like in your abdomen doing really good work, making sure all of those nutrients, this is them, they're all going to all the cells in all the body, right? So those are normal. And so but that's what I'm saying, like people, and I'm grossly generalizing, and I do apologize for people who are aware of their bodies, because there are some incredible people who've done a lot of work to feel their body, right? um but just knowing that's normal digestion, that's what it feels like that's bloatiness, that's just your gut doing its really great job. it's gonna
Yeah.
it's gonna go down, don't worry. It'll like, not uncomfortable bloaty, but you know what I mean. Like, I would
Yeah.
say there's probably good reasons, digestively, what's going on with the bloaty feeling, and we can work on that. Do you know what I mean? If you go from eating, oh, I don't know, super duper low fiber, highly refined things where not very much fiber, and then you say lentils are the answer, and you eat a whole whack of lentils, yeah, you're probably going to feel a bit bloaty.
and
Because
and doing what I do, like that's a huge concern. Like, oh, I don't eat those foods because they make me gassy. I'm
yeah,
like gas is a good thing. Gas is a
yeah,
sign that like A, you've got fiber, B, you've got a working gut, and C, you've got like all these awesome microbes doing
yeah,
their thing.
doing their
That,
thing,
like
right?
that's what you want to happen.
Yeah. And then the things that I know that we as dietitians, I can't wait to see your face, is talk to people about their bowel movements,
Yeah,
right? So about their
it's my
poops.
favorite thing to do.
And so I find that really funny because, yeah, when people who are non-dietitians listen sometimes to our conversations, they're going, what are you talking about? And so for a lot of people, like, that's a taboo subject. It's dirty, it's awful, it's waste, and you don't want to even think about where does that go once it leaves your body, and all that stuff. And um, well, it is what would I say, a huge contributor to general feeling great,
Yeah.
right? Like feeling great, like, that you're a gut person. So and I live with celiac disease, so I know all about guts that are Wonko. Anyway, you asked about gender
Yeah.
related to, what was it? Remind me.
Related to the, determinants of health and nutrition
Yeah,
care, and like, and
yeah,
maybe we back up to sort of really, because I really want to talk about like, safe care for gender diverse people. And, about 5 years ago, you began specifically exploring transgender inclusive nutrition. And like what was that? You mentioned you live with a trans person in your home. Like, so what was that opening for you? What was that exploration for you? Like, how did
yeah.
you start?
Wow, there's so much there. I'm going to try to be brief. Okay, so my eldest identifies as gender neutral, but at the time identified as trans male.
Mm, okay.
Um, that person, my eldest, doesn't live in my home, but because of COVID, is here with me. Just because, and maybe that will change because things are, well, whether right or wrong, whether they're opening up or not. But anyway, it just felt safer to be here with me. And being, if you're going to be alone in a house, be alone at your place or be alone at my place with me.
Yeah.
We decided being alone together would be would be great. So anyway, what happened? This is before COVID, before like it's quite a long while ago when they started to take testosterone injections. And they were, I've told you this before, I'm sure, but they were behind me. I was sitting at the kitchen table and they were over at the counter doing some food prep. And we were just talking as you do, right? And I went, "Oh my God, where's your bum? Like, where did it go?" And I don't know, Mom, I'm on testosterone, like body composition changes. And I went, "Oh my God, body composition. I no idea that would happen. Of course that would happen. Like, I just don't understand why I was so not even thinking about it, right? So we're not talking right now, like I just want to park it, but we'll come back to it. The social determinants of health and food security and those things related to gender. Okay, that's
Yeah.
really important. Um, but now I'm talking about an individual who's hormonal bath, or well, it's not a bath because that would be outside, but inside their body, the hormonal um, levels in their body have changed. So of course there's a redistribution of muscle and fat in the body. Of course there is. And that got me to thinking, like, it was like we're really fast thinking about, holy moly, I teach nutrition assessment and I have never brought this up. I have never even thought about it until this minute. I better get on this. I better get on this, right? So then I felt really awkward about being a cis hetero woman, um, doing this kind of research. And the incredibly wonderful pride groups that I talked to said, "Look, you're a researcher, you're a professor, you have a voice that many of us don't have. If you can use it for good to help us, please do." And I went, okay, but very mindful of the fact that I am cis, I am hetero, right? And I don't want to impose I don't want to impose anything. All I invite us to do as dietitians is to think about how we go about nutrition assessment and nutrition counseling, and think about how often gender informs what we do. And it's throughout, it's all through it. So if you say, as you have done, okay, larger body, less active bodies, bigger, more active bodies, I think that's what we have to think about, is who is this person? That's pretty awkward for dietitians because we love our little, like this is me doing calculations on a calculator, right? Or writing them down. 30 times 70 kilos equals, right? Um, eh, and I didn't randomly pick 30, 30 calories per kilo. Like, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so it's awkward to think about, but wait a second, does that mean and back to this reductionist thinking, well, if I'm not doing that, I guess you don't need me. It's like, hands up, I'm out of here. No, no, no. Like, we need to think about, how has gender informed what we call our standard practice? That's a huge question. Number two, how come that happened? What happened? It has to do with the minimizing, the crushing of women's voices, or anybody who wasn't cis male.
Yeah.
Hetero cis male. White cis male. White, don't speak English with an accent cis male.
Mhm.
Do you know what I mean? That's like the top of the heap in terms of hierarchies. And gosh, some fantastic, heartbreaking work has been done by people to try to, stone by stone dismantle it. Just not saying that white, hetero, cis men don't matter. Of course they do, but everybody else matters too. You know what I mean? And so it's this whole fear of taking away my power. No, we just want to share it around a bit, you
Yeah.
know? So back to dietitians thinking about how do I approach nutrition assessment if what you're saying, because what we are saying, Desiree, is that all those little arithmetic um, equations that you did, arithmetic, I suppose it would be, uh, are not what we're talking about. Like stop, like literally stop doing them.
Yeah.
And the only time I personally can think of that I would want somebody to do that kind of arithmetic for me is if I were in a coma, in an ICU, and you needed to keep me alive through artificial feeding.
Hmm.
That would be it. Please make sure when I wake up, I'm well nourished. Like that would be the message, right? But if I'm alive and if I'm alive, dead people don't talk, right? If I'm conscious and
I'm
I'm in an
conscious.
ICU, well, or so we think. I don't know. They're probably talking right now. Who knows? I just finished watching the BBC comedy Ghosts, so it's just
Oh,
really funny.
they may be talking. They'd be like, "You're so wrong. We're talking all the time."
Exactly. Anyway, if we are to think about how do we approach practice to say, I'm like what you have already said, I'm here with this person, they're sharing their story with me, and I'm going to figure out what I would recommend that doesn't involve arithmetic. It would transform, like that simple thing. No, like, I'm not saying no arithmetic ever, because that's not what I just said, right? But,
Hmm.
but if you say, okay, how do I work with this person that doesn't involve crunching a few numbers? Then we would transform everything
Yeah.
because we have a huge amount of knowledge, we dietitians, about the human body and how it uses nutrients and complexity of food you've just mentioned. It's not a particular subnutrient or nutrient. It's all of those in an incredible matrix that we don't even know. I haven't even begun to understand
Mm.
how food works in the body, right? It's
Yeah.
so fascinating. So non-arithmetic. And then can we go back to food security and
Yeah.
oh, I'm
Please.
sorry. This is like twirls of it's like curly hair. Eventually it all,
But it's also beautiful because I think, for so many people listening who think that what nutrition is a set of rules and guidelines and math, this really just starts to hammer home like nutrition is not just a science, it is also an art. There is
oh
an
boy.
enormous amount of nuance and also like personal and professional let's reclaim this word of competency, but competency around taking the human in front of you, taking
Mhm.
what you know, considering their lifestyle, their ability to feed themselves, and turning that into actual meaningful care is like hugely complex.
So I'm going to do a commercial message, non-commercial message, but a
Perfect.
promotional message for critical dietetics, which is
Hmm.
what you just said is exactly what we've been working on with critical dietetics. There have been those of us, remember you said at the very beginning, I felt like a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we find with, I was part of a group that the first gathering of people to talk about, what is this thing we're talking about, and we called it critical dietetics, and do we want to move forward with it, or are we happy we've just all had, Dr. Jackie Gingras convened that meeting with a Shirk grant, and bless them for doing that, because it was transformational in our
Yeah.
history. And what we find at conferences is that dietitians come to the conference and go, "You're my people. I've been looking for you for a long time." Because they're all people. This is so interesting, Desiree. All people who at one time have said, "I'm a square peg in a round hole." Well, if there's enough of you, then that means, or there's
Yeah.
enough of us, that means that that's just a way of being, and let's celebrate that, right? And as opposed to what you and I were, how we were socialized to stuff that down and don't let it come to the surface in order to meet your competencies, in order to become credentialed. And so, what I think that's done is just squashed creative thinking because we were, yeah, I'm going to like our brains are incredible, and like you just said, like they're just like they're all over the place all the time. And the challenge is we are socialized. Like when we want to write, we've got to silence all of that and say, okay, what's my message that I'm gonna write? And
Yeah.
if you're not able to do that, because there are lots of people that just, like, I find writing incredibly difficult because I know what I want to say, but I have to make it linear, and I don't want to. That's not how my brain works, right? So to celebrate the way you are and the way you think, and oh my goodness, there's a whole lot of pathologizing of that, isn't there now?
There, yeah, there is. And
Okay.
for anyone who's listening, because I want to make sure that the idea of critical dietetics doesn't get lost as an idea. Like this is a movement, and there are also tangible things associated with. There is a conference. There's also an academic journal
Mm-hmm.
of critical
There is.
dietetics too. So
There
if
is
you are a
peer-reviewed journal.
dietitian, seek it out.
Yes, for sure. And critical dietetics, just Google it.
Yeah.
World Critical Dietetics. I don't know what the URL
I think
is.
it's World Critical
Anyway,
Dietetics blog, I think.
I think it is called. I was just
Yeah.
thinking, was it Blogspot or I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
It will Google.
anyway, and it is you know what I said earlier about the difference between submitting something, not that there's funds available, but I did submit a grant, right, to look at food, nutrition, and eating issues of trans and gender diverse people, getting a response that, well, how many are there? Like, would you even find people to participate? As opposed to over on the critical dietetics world, it's that's super interesting. Why haven't we thought, the very questions you're asking? Why haven't we thought about that before? How come we ignored gender up until now? Hmm. And another thing, Desiree, is that I have a colleague who did nutrition or nutrition, what do you call it? Outpatient nutrition counseling
Mhm.
for decades, who said, oh my gosh, when I think back now, the vast majority of people who came into that service were perimenopausal women. And I never, ever, ever asked them about menopause and how it was affecting their relationships with their bodies and food,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like, again, there you go, because that wasn't the dominant thing that we are supposed to think about in our training. And also another instance of this would be, when people always ask me, well, what's your research about? And I research two, well, many things, but two things, predominantly trans and gender diverse people, their food, nutrition, and eating issues, and also what's it like to eat when you're sick, and the whole feeding a loved one who's sick, how incredibly difficult that is when the desire to eat is gone away. And so almost always when I say that, I'm talking about social gatherings like cups of coffee and community
Yeah.
day on Canada Day, and stuff like that. Oh, people with eating disorders? And I go, well, no, no.
Yeah.
Like, if it's people in the relationship with food, somehow that's categorized as eating disorders, whereas it's all of us, every
Mhm.
single human on the planet. And I dare say every animal on the planet has a relationship with food, right? Well, plants
Yeah.
too. Um, and I go, no, well, no, how did that happen? Like, that's reductionism again. Like, I'm trying to make sense of what you told me. Gosh, it's complex. Oh, you must be talking about eating disorders. No, no. Or people who self label as having an eating disorder, when and what it is, I think, this is my, is it a theory? Maybe. That the preponderance or the incidence of eating disorders in people who identify as gender diverse is higher.
Mm.
And what I'm wondering right now is that so, or is it dietary cacophony? Is I just don't know what to do. I'm kind of stumped. So instead
Yeah.
of eating, I just don't eat because I don't know what to do. And I don't
Yeah.
want to mess it up, right? And I think, like, there's some research I would love to do, love to do. Like, what does that really mean to say there's a higher incidence of eating disorders?
Yeah.
So that gets to, there is,
Yeah.
there is
Yeah.
higher incidence of well, what's labeled right now eating disorders, and it has to do a lot with. This is super relevant to what we just talked about of getting away from the arithmetic parts of nutrition assessment, of what we found, our research at Acadia, the group that's there, is the performing of one's gender identity is the number one thing on the people, the pride groups that we've worked with. That's number
Hmm.
one thing on their minds, is how do I look like my gender identity, because we are socialized as women on a binary, women and men, to eat in a certain way.
Hmm.
Women are supposed to be neat. You're not supposed to have stuff on your face. You're supposed to take small bites so that, and you're not supposed to eat too much. And you're supposed to eat, like it's all laughable, feminine foods, whatever that is. And men like meat. Mm, and
Yeah.
and I even have an ad that I use in teaching for students to get this point. It was like, and it's an ad for salad, I think salad, salad ingredients.
Yeah.
Um, 10 salad recipes that even a man would like. Like, what is
Like,
that?
what the heck does that even? And
Right?
I had this on our list of things to talk about because, like we do have these weird gendered notions about like, and when I was, so maybe I was in a lovely little University of British Columbia bubble, but like I had a professor, Gwen Chapman, and I was really fascinated by her work because she did
Yeah.
research, for example, looking at like the gendered nuances in nutrition. She did some like research on like fire halls because of course this is typically like a male dominated area, but then quote unquote unusually for men also had a really strong food culture
Hmm.
of cooking and deriving status in the fire hall of cooking and like sort of like pulling this all together. And like when I sort of open up to like, okay, if someone doesn't fit the gender binary or someone is transitioning,
Yeah.
like how do these expectations like weigh on their new identity? Like it's
That's exactly what I mean about,
yeah,
that's the cacophony, right? Like
yeah.
how, so and I mean, I think, probably it's the school of hard knocks that some people who are transitioning experience, going, well, you don't seem to be eating like a woman, or like, and that raises questions. So they don't want to, people don't want to drop. Again, here I come as a person who's not living this life, but from what I understand, don't want to draw attention to themselves, because the um the homophobia, transphobia that people experience is ubiquitous. It's
Yeah.
everywhere, and they don't want to draw attention to themselves for personal safety reasons, right? So I guess I better learn how to eat. What does it look like when you're a woman, right? How to
Yeah.
eat, and learning that, as opposed to us just talking about it and saying, well, girls, women are socialized to eat small. And I was on a committee with it's for a trans health committee, and there was a person there who was transitioning who told this story, and this is so revealing, that they took they and their partner have 4 children, 4 teenagers. They took them to an all-you-can-eat Chinese place, a buffet, and the proprietor came up to transitioning person and said, "Come on, buddy, you can eat more than that."
Hmm.
And they said, "Wow, identifying as a woman or appearing like a woman, no one would have ever muttered those words to me,
Yeah.
ever." Right? And so I guess I'm doing it. I guess like I'm putting something on them, but I'm thinking, well, I guess I look like a man now. That's good. Yeah, that's what I wanted, right? Whatever a man is, right?
Yeah.
I'm being treated the way I wanted to be
Yeah.
treated, and that's affirming, right? So, but also thinking about, yeah, you're right. As a woman, women don't hear those words. Come
No.
on, you could eat more than that,
Yeah.
you
It's
know?
like, oh wow, you're hungry today. Like just I mean,
Yeah,
and
some very denigrating things, right?
and,
Wow, you must be hungry.
and I mean,
Yeah, you're
and
right.
to those, to those funding boards who were like, well, how many, these notions, these concepts, these constructs affect us all. Like
Yeah, yeah,
gender
yeah, yeah, yeah.
diverse and gender neutral discussions and nutrition affect us all, not
Hmm.
just gender diverse or trans people. Like it's like literally deconstructing all of this stuff that we decide you are this or you eat this way or your body should be this way.
So I was just thinking, as you said that, when we talk about Euro or gender diversity, that includes people
Hmm.
who happily sit on the binary, right? So it
Hmm.
actually is all of us, all of
All of
us.
us.
All of us, and it's not an eating disorder. It's just all of us think or don't think. Deborah Lupton, who's an Australian food sociologist, has a term that she calls unthoughts related to food and
Mm.
eating. That there are the things we don't even think about. Like there's, so what you're talking about is, yes, we're thinking, but according to her thinking, Deborah Lupton's thinking about this is that that's so tiny. It's not even like it doesn't even get us below 95% of what we
Yeah.
think of, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like what we think of is so teeny weeny compared to everything that surrounds us and influences our eating. And so when you start to be aware of that, it does get overwhelming. And I can see that's where the cacophony and the feeling stuck, like I don't know what to eat, so I guess I'll eat nothing at all. Or feel really guilty about anything I put in my mouth, which
Yeah.
is also uh like I don't know, celebrating being alive, and this food is nourishes you to keep going another hour or two, you know, or probably 4 hours. you know, Oh gosh, there's so much for us.
There's so
Like
much.
so thank you for this podcast, Desiree, because there's so much to in the language that's called unpacking. I don't really like that term unpacking, but when we start to think about holy smoky poo, what's going on
Yeah.
in this everyday thing, right? There's some really fabulous researchers that I had the opportunity to study as a doctoral student, whose work now might be considered dated, but I and one of the last name is Smith, and I can't think of their first name. Dorothy Smith. Yeah. And
Dorothy
Patricia
Smith.
Thompson is another
Okay.
person, right? The study of the everyday. I love that. I love it because it's so complex,
Yeah.
and um and I have now I live in Nova Scotia, and when talking to people about, like, people in government about, like I said, the pit of malnutrition sitting outside the hospital door for
Yeah.
everybody. Um, and when I've talked to people in government or in, health about, have you like, what could we do about that? And they're going, oh yeah, food and eating, it's so complex. We just can't even wrap our heads around it. So we do nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. Like those of us who are willing or able or really want to delve into that complexity,
Yeah.
we have to, right?
And
And come up with some solutions.
for practitioners listening to this who are like, yeah, wow, okay, this is big, but I want to take a bite out of it. Like, what are the resources? And of course, you have a website that you are, starting to build
Yeah.
up as a resource. And,
Yeah.
so tell us about your website, and then
Yeah.
also
Oh,
what other
research.
resources are coming our way so that we can do better in this.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the way that I work with students, because I'm teaching students research methods, right? So the
Mhm.
requirements for them for any paper is they have to look at the peer-reviewed literature. So what's that saying? We've been socialized that that's it. That's the word. That's the word. But that's just one, right? Look at gray literature. So that's anything coming from government, anything, if you think about it, that could move their URL on the internet. That's gray literature. If it's a peer reviewed journal article, they get an URL. That's it forever. They don't move it. They don't move journal articles around. But anything else, the URL can move. So governments, any commodity group, any public health related group, any chronic disease like diabetes association or celiac association or intestinal health association. I don't know if there is such a thing, but there is, isn't
The
there?
Canadian Digestive Health Association.
Yes,
Yeah.
the Canadian Digestive Health.
Health Association.
Of course, there you go.
There you
There's
go.
association. So that's a gray literature source,
Yeah.
right? Like, what are they writing about? Because there are gems in there, right?
Yeah.
Like little hints that you go, aha, that person's thinking a bit like me. If you're thinking, anybody thinking, this is a big invitation. I'm not buying this. I'm not buying what I see presented to me as the evidence. You're in really good company, like really good company, and it doesn't take too much of just putting that out there to people to find other friends to play with. And the joy of having this way of communicating as we do right now, like we're 5,000 kilometers apart right now, Desiree,
Yeah.
and it looks like we're in the
At
same
least.
room. Sounds like we're in the same room. Feels like we're in the
Amazing.
same room. It is amazing where we weren't able to do that 20 years ago, right?
Hmm.
So okay, peer reviewed, gray literature. like online resources. So what are
Hmm.
people, let's say you're interested in celiac disease or you're interested in living with ostomies, go to something like Reddit and subreddits, and what are people actually writing about, right? What are they actually, yeah. And then I'm missing one. There's four. Shoot. Oh, and Penn. What's on Penn? So you
Yes.
know very well. So that's practice-based evidence in nutrition, which is a database of information. So what's there? Because you know, and I know, Desiree, that a lot of that is what was already in the peer-reviewed literature. And number
Hmm.
one, it's been interpreted for use by dietitians. So you have to take all of that information and process it yourself. Our brains are wonderful things, and they'll do that for us. Usually when we're sleeping, or we're mowing the lawn, or we're washing dishes, or whatever. Your brain will sort things out for you while you're busy doing other things, and you go, oh, that's what's going on here. And I guess that's what I've done with the research that I'm doing, is for both groups of people, those caregivers who are feeding loved ones who are really ill, and also working on behalf of trans and gender diverse people, is to say, okay, I'm hearing a lot of stuff here. I've read what's in the literature in terms of trans and gender diverse people and nutrition, food, and eating issues. Not much.
Yeah.
I see. There's just a little bit. There's a little bit, and it's like, sorry, my roses. It's pollen season in Canada. Um, there's, I would call it the kind of writing that's about, don't be like, be careful about people's pronouns. Be respectful of people's names and pronouns. And so we've had that, and I would say that's like a historic thing, and we're moving on, I hope, where that's like, oh yeah, sure, that makes total sense, let's do that. And then there's a kind of research or kind of presentation of, holy smokers, all of this is really changed and we don't know what we're doing, but there you go, get at it. You know, that kind of, like, that's not what people are saying, but they're saying, you know, we have to question things,
Yeah.
and rightly so. And then what I'm trying to do is provide a, okay, so given all of that, here's what I would suggest. It's not meaning for a second that this is it forever, carved in granite, and you can't muck with it. Of course you can. That's what I want people to do, right? So there you go. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
good.
definitely go to the peer reviewed. But are there, because you mentioned, I think
Oh
you
yeah,
mentioned
yeah,
that there
yeah.
are actually like guidelines for
Yeah.
like gender
Well,
diverse care
coming out
in
of
the
these
works.
fingers, I'm working on them, and it's taken me a
Beautiful.
long time, and I'm getting close to actually. And I'll tell you with the big, it's a big story, but I really had a hard time because I was trying to do what we talked about earlier. I was trying to make it look like every other set of clinical practice guidelines, and I
Mhm.
realized that that's not going to work
Yeah.
because there are no numbers. First of all, no numbers, no mentions of weight, no, nothing like that, right? So it's like, have a look at the person in front of you. I am a really big fan. You've already mentioned gut function and how's it going, right? Ask
Yeah.
people, like, draw a line above and below the stomach. I always do this, right? So from your epigastric, the joint of your
Yeah.
esophagus to your stomach, up. How's it going eating? How's that going? Because that's how we ingest food, right? Is there anything coming up there? Teeth, mouth, tongue, you know, anything, being able to sit upright, stuff like that, right? That will affect food intake. And then say, okay, from that line down, how are things going? Because that's where digestion takes place, right?
Hmm.
And people, they don't know about human anatomy, but they know that there's kind of like a get food in, and then there's a digested,
Yeah.
and then waste comes out. So that's useful. Like anybody has that kind of anatomy.
Yeah.
If they have a functioning gut, you know, I guess,
Yeah.
or a non-functioning gut.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the kind of work that I've always tried to do, is let's turn this into something that's like, dispense with the overbearing kind of mathematics or arithmetic of it all, and just try to look at the person in front of you and get a sense of what their needs are. So
Yeah.
that's about caregivers, the great ignored. um, the amount, if we paid every caregiver a wage for the work they do, we couldn't, it would crash our economy. It's something, I think, in, I don't even know the numbers, like, it's billions and billions and billions of dollars, right?
Yeah.
And most of that work is done by women. So there's another gendered aspect of it. So we can't think about the people in front of us, as you said before, um, alone, because there's somebody, if they're sick, there's somebody in their life who's helping take care of them, and that person needs our care and attention and
Yeah.
love too. So, okay, so there's that. There's feeding loved ones who are sick, and then there's the trans and gender diversity. So what I did is I created cathmorley.com. I still am employed for another few weeks, and then I will be, retired from one job and launching Catherine Morley Dietetics, and that's about. So thank you for asking about that. And really, what I want to do there is in that, with that website as the basis, is provide information for people that if it resonates with them, that's fantastic. And if it doesn't, let me know, and
Yeah.
let's figure out what can work for folks. So it's not so much that I'm in the, in the business of providing nutrition counseling. I just want to get the information that's stored in this out
Yeah.
before I go, before I die, because it's, I don't want it to be, well, I've been working on this stuff all these years and I haven't really had a chance to publish it. I'm just going to get it out there. And also,
Mm-hmm.
Desiree, you may well jump to, isn't that gray literature? It absolutely is gray literature. I've done the trying to get things published route, and I'm quite fed up with it, actually. I'm just
Yeah.
tired of it. When you do groups with, like as I have with pride groups here in Nova Scotia, and then you get responses from reviewers saying, well, what was your sample size and what was your hypothesis? Well, the sample size was whoever showed up when the sign was put up that there's going to be an event here.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You're being forced back into those rigid thing, what counts as knowledge. And
Totally.
I reject that notion.
Yeah.
I think all of our knowledge is important. And I'm not talking about, like, well, it's going to sound awful, like things that are half-cocked crazy stuff. I'm talking about your lived experience, my lived
Yeah.
experience. What do we see, and valuing that for what it is, because that's how
Yeah.
we've made decisions as humans for a long, long
Totally.
time. Yeah, so that's what I'm working on. And there is a blog called Feeding a Loved One Who is Sick, or Flows is what it spells.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a podcast for dietitians on, and it's called Nutrition Counseling Unscripted with Carol Townsend, who's a dietitian in Thunder Bay. And the two of us found each other, kind of like this conversation. We just
Yeah.
found each other and said, let's start talking. Just start talking. So
Amazing.
that's where folks can find. And I'd love to hear from anybody. Cathmorley.com. No. Yeah, cath@cathmorley.com.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
we'll make sure to put in the show notes like links to your blog and your podcast and all of those good things. And
Thank you. I
I feel
appreciate it.
like we could honestly talk for hours. I'm so energized by this conversation, but
Yeah.
we'll just have to have you back.
You've
And
got some editing to do.
we've got some editing to do, totally fine, but we always close with our rapid fire questions. That's sort of
Oh,
our like
shoot.
beloved all sorts all sorts tradition.
Okay.
And so they're all over the place. So the
Okay.
first question is best book you've read this year
Mhm.
or audiobook you've listened to.
Oh, golly. I don't know. I've reread um, Persuasion by Jane Austen. I love that
Ooh.
book. I love that book because it's about what we've been talking about, of breaking free from the societal expectation that other people can persuade you what you're going to do in your life, and I love that. I love the story, and the fact that Jane Austen wrote it around 1800 um, means that we've all been living with this kind, women been living with this kind of pressure of just do what you're told.
Yeah.
And a young woman deciding, I know what's right for me, this is what I'm going to do. It's a timeless story, and it's really worthwhile. And I'm a member of the Jane Austen Society of North America, so Jane Austen's always a go-to for me because she put into words what a lot of us have experienced in life in a much more restricted time for
I
women
love
than
that.
we are in right now.
I have not read
um,
that one.
and
I
I'm
have
not
to read it.
so much a fan of, like, I've tried to like fiction. I really try, but nah. And I have lots of really great books, like this book here, When Things Fall Apart, that I like to reread. So to remind myself, like, the people that we work with as dietitians, this is where they are,
I think
right?
that's
Like, things have fallen apart,
yeah.
and so how are you? It's what you and I've talked about. Be
Yeah.
there. Be a safe place for people to share their often difficult story.
Yeah.
Almost always difficult story. Yeah.
That's actually that is an incredible book recommendation for
Yeah, I like
caregivers.
that. And
Unbelievable.
yeah, there's so many. Anyway, and of course, a really good one that I'm going to read again just because of personal things that I want to go back and revisit. This one here, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's a classic existential book that he wrote thinking about surviving the Holocaust in Germany and looking about him as a psychiatrist, and I think he's a psychiatrist, and looking about him for who dies and who lives. Like,
Yeah.
what is it that's keeping people going when everything, we shouldn't be here, right?
Yeah.
Everything's working against us here. What keeps us going? And it's the people who have made meaning from their life. There is no search for meaning. There is no meaning. It's what you make it,
Yeah.
right? And that for me is a lesson I have to keep learning all over and over and over again.
I think we all do. I think it's the human condition.
Yeah.
All right. Your favorite, because you're a transplant, your favorite thing about living in the Maritimes?
Oh, the food supply is amazing.
Yeah.
It's incredible because nothing travels very far. And it seems like, so I live in a rural place about 40 minutes outside of Halifax, which is everywhere outside of Halifax.
Yeah.
And there are all kinds of, at the end of the driveway, you know, a few cucumbers, a few raspberries, whatever. And it's just like that person picked it that day, right? And it's like $1. It's like everything is
amazing.
Cheap and an honor system, and I just love it. I never had that living in a city ever, so I like that a lot.
Oh, I love that.
And I love the people. Like, everybody is chatty. Like, you can have really nice conversations with people in the grocery store lineup. Where when I lived in a big city, everybody's, including me. I was not communicative, right?
Why are you talking to me? What's wrong with you?
Why are you talking to me, you weirdo? No, it's not like that. It's like, hey, how's it going? Like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, it's really lovely. You go for a walk and every single person passes by you goes, hey, how's it going?
Okay.
It's wonderful.
It's Friday night. Do you get takeout or do you cook something? And if so, what do you cook?
Well, I live in a rural area, so I don't get takeout because there isn't. Everything is a big
there's
drive.
no DoorDash to the.
No, gosh, no. I mean, so I love that. I love the quiet and I mean, like, I do have a town here. It's not like there's just no DoorDash stuff. Anyway, so if I do get takeout, okay, well, this is a complicated. I know it's supposed to be rapid fire, but I live with celiac disease and I also malabsorb sugar alcohols, which probably the vast majority of humans do. So for you as a gut health person, Desiree, malabsorption of xylitol, mannitol, aspartame, all these things accounts for a lot of bad stuff in people's guts. Anyway, I have to be really, really, really careful about that. So I do make almost like most of my own food. And when I go out, I have like a little companion pills to deal with symptoms that are going to come. I can't really trust anything I eat outside. So what do I cook? One of our favorite things is brecadin. So we have breakfast foods at dinner time.
I love calling. So instead of breakfast for dinner, it's brecadin.
We call it brecadin
in
our house. And also I've become a really big fan of a salad with some kind of protein on it. I don't care what. So a salad that's got seeds and nuts and dried fruits and apple and and I love crunchy. So crunchy is my go-to. I love crunchy. If it's like a stew that doesn't crunch, I'm not so fond of that. Has to be crunchy. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing you would tell your younger dietitian self.
Don't believe this. Trust your gut. Trust your gut that when you think, I'm not buying this, that's worth exploring further. Because I didn't know what to do, Desiree, when that happened. Did you intern at Vancouver General?
No, Edmonton, back when it was Capital Health.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, I was just going to say there's a big closet full of diet sheets and going, I don't feel comfortable giving this to people. But I was a youngster. And I was told that's what you're supposed to do, along with a Canada's Food Guide attached to the back, which was just mixed messages all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I don't think this is right, but I did it anyway. And so I should have tried, because that's what I've ended up doing in my life, is going, okay, so what was that really? I didn't realize that till this very moment, but what was that all about? Going, I'm not buying this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm doing what I have to because I have to get the credential here. And there's no one around here questioning what we're doing. So I'll be quiet. And I moved to another place where it was all about questioning what we did, which was great. So my younger self, I would say, you're not, this is right. Like, you're on the right track here. But look into that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And know that there are multiple ways of exploring things, not the very limited view that you've been taught.
Okay. And last one. What is giving you hope right now?
Oh. Huh. What is giving me hope right now? I've had a tough time recently.
Mm-hmm.
With some very ageist things that I've experienced, and that really makes me very sad. So I'm not really, I am full of hope, because we're in a time right now in dietetics where something's happening. Something revolutionary is happening, and I don't have words for it, but I think it has to do with what you and I've talked about, of embracing multiple ways of knowing, celebrating multiple ways of knowing, celebrating the diversity of humans and the privilege we have to work with them, and how much we can learn from them. I think that gives me hope. That gives me hope. What I'm finding hard to deal with is ageism, that somehow once there's a magical age you reach, that you're not relevant anymore. And that really hurts. Like, it's really painful. And that's classifying all people by their age. This is what we've been talking about all this time, right? Classifying people according to their gender and expecting that you know all about them when you can't possibly, right? And so just categorizing everybody by their age, as if they can't, like, we do the same thing with very young people, and that makes me sad, right? Like, you don't know nothing. But that's not true. Like, they're young people who are living through a complex time. Like, let's learn from each other, right? So what's giving me hope is there's something going on, something really fundamentally important going on, about how we organize education, about how we accredit it, about how we, about what are we doing? What are we doing in this profession? And talking about it like you are, right? That gives me a lot of hope. So just even, I would say, I don't want to minimize it with just even being on your podcast is giving me hope, because you're willing to talk about these things, Desiree, and I'm so grateful.
Well, and I'm so grateful that is for you and the work that you do. Like I said, we're just going to have more conversations.
Okay, let's do that. That'd be fun.